Old Testament, it's almost 80% of the Bible. It's a lot of the Bible. Now, before I even start to talk about the breakdown of how the books are arranged, let's talk about what's in it from a content standpoint. They're going to teach you the Old Testament, it prepares you for the coming of Jesus, and the New Testament, Jesus is here, he's risen, and now he's coming back. And to a certain point, that's true, but it's not really 100% accurate. So let's talk about first the period, the time period of the Old Testament. At the very, very, very beginning, in the first 11 chapters, we're dealing with the creation of the world. Now, once again, though, this is super important. This was never meant to be an historical account. This is the legends, the myths that were passed down from time that tell about how there's one God in the universe, and that one God created the entire world. Now, after 11 chapters, not 11 books, 11 chapters of only one book, we start to get into this guy named Abraham. You've probably heard of him. To Christians, to Jews, and to Muslims. He's a huge person in all of those faiths. Okay, but God finds this one guy. Now, this is important because it's a polytheistic society, y'all. That means they believe in a lot of gods. So at this time, this one guy is visited by one who says, I'm the one true God. And the story that moves forward, it goes for 4 generations. Abraham, his kids, his grandkids, and his great-grandkids. And that's all in this book of Genesis, his first book. And in the 3rd generation, this guy Jacob, Abraham's grandkid, his name is changed to Israel. God changes his name, and he has 12 kids. And these spawn what we know of as the 12 tribes of Israel. And what we do is we follow those 12 tribes of Israel for the rest of the Old Testament. Now that's super simplifying it. But as we're following these 12 tribes, we see that this family that keeps expanding, they're growing a ton, they're making a lot of mistakes in the process, they're trying to figure out life, they're trying to figure out God. Now, as they grow, God ends up choosing some individual leaders from this family, from these 12 tribes, and they call those the judges, but they're kind of leaders. This is the book of Judges. So we're almost in like 6, 7, 8 books deep. And he's choosing these leaders to help lead these tribes. But after a while, these groups start going, why can't we have a king? Everybody else has a king. Why can't we have a king? God gives them a king to rule them. And this is a period people like to call the United Monarchy. And what it means is all 12 tribes united under one king. But think about this. The United Monarchy only lasted for 3 kings. Only about 70 years were these 12 combined under kings. And 2 of those are super famous, David and Solomon. Everyone's heard of them. But this monarchy is also super important because this is also when we start getting really precise records, because now we have kingdoms, we have people, scribes that are writing things down. This is where the Bible starts to get a little bit more historically accurate. And it's around this time that we actually start getting history. Now, after 3 kings, remember we talked about it, the 12 tribes, they can't agree anymore. They break apart, they separate. And that takes us into the divided monarchy, because now they're divided, they're not united. Now that's just a little bit. That takes you through the book of Genesis, all the way to Kings. And just this little section we're talking about right now, that's almost 25% of the entire Bible. Now during the divided monarchy, 10 of the tribes, we're gonna call them the northern tribes because they're the most north on the map. They get their own king, and they're still calling themselves the Kingdom of Israel. It's only 10 though, it's not 12. The last 2 are on the bottom on the map, and they start calling themselves the Kingdom of Judah. This is Judah. So we got Kingdom of Israel, Judah, same 12, but now they're 2 different kingdoms, okay? They've separated. And all of a sudden the Bible starts talking about the journey of these 2 different sets. Honestly, it gets a little confusing sometimes when you start to read it, because you're like, wait, the kingdom of this, the kingdom of this happened, and they're telling you the bad stuff and the good stuff. Which kings were bad, which kings were good, which ones tried to bring people back to God, which ones did their own thing. Now, this is also during the time that you start to hear a lot about prophets. Now, there's a lot of famous prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and these prophets, they basically speak and deliver messages to the people from God. It's not what a lot of people think. A lot of people think prophet, fortune teller. That's not what they are. They're messengers. They're delivering a message. And if you don't listen, if you don't fix your life, if you don't follow God, you're going to have some really harsh consequences. Now, the northern 10 tribes, remember, the kingdom of Israel, they're taken over first by the Assyrians, which has now become a big world power. Now, this is around like 721 BC. So around 2,750 years ago, those top 10 tribes, they're decimated to never return. Now, the bottom 2 tribes of Judah, they hold on a little longer, a little more than 100 years, but ultimately, they're also taken over when the Babylonians become the big world power. Now, a lot of scholars believe this is around maybe 586 BC. And this is the first time, basically, that the Israelites and the people from Judah, later to be known as the Jews, are scattered all over the place and put into a term that we call the exile. So what is the exile? It means you've always lived in your own land. You had your own country, you lived there, you grew up there. Somebody came in, destroyed it, decimated it, and scattered you everywhere. And now you're in exile. You're no longer in your home. And this is also the first time that these groups of people are figuring out what their religion and what their culture looks like when they are scattered in other places and not living in their own country anymore. Now, this exile, it lasts almost 70 years. And it's really all about the things that the prophets warned were going to happen. Now, for 70 years, they're living under the Babylonian rule. Those are the big dudes, they're the big world power. They're making new homes, they're trying to establish themselves, and all of a sudden the Persians end up being the new world power. They take over. They allow them to return to their homeland, rebuild their temple. This is actually called the Second Temple. And this is a time period we know as the post-exilic period. Basically, it's after the exile, y'all. That's what it means. It's the post-exilic period. They build the Second Temple, and honestly, there's not much more that's written about it after that. Almost nothing after 333 BC. But what we do know is the 12 tribes, the whole thing that the Old Testament was telling the story of, they never reunited. They were never strong again. And what we know is that when Jesus comes into the New Testament, all 12 of these tribes, now scattered, are all waiting for a savior. But most of them don't know that this is the one that they were going to get.